I'm sure you know that India is not part of the group of 7. But did you know that India has been invited to all of the G7 summits that have happened since 2019? And India has not been to this summits just for attendance. India has been there because G7 needs India, and India delivers on certain pointers where no other economy or country is able to deliver. What are those reasons? What makes India special for G7, and how come India has a seat at the G7 table, which is the table of most advanced economies across the world? Hello everyone, welcome to Vajiram and Ravi's Flash News. My name is Shubhangi Singh, and today we will be taking a deep dive to understand that what India has done or what India has been doing to earn this seat at the table of G7. Now, in this regards, we have to understand that what has brought this to light. So, recently G7 summit was concluded, and when we are talking about G7, one of the most industrialized, advanced economies, the democracies of the world, that is group of 7. They were formed back in 1970s when the oil shock disrupted the global oil supply chains, and this is when the group of 8 was made. But later, one country was dropped out. Can you tell me in the comment section which country was present in the group of 8 which has been dropped out? And now we have in front of us G7, which includes US, UK, France, Canada, Germany, Italy and Japan. Now, this group of 7 symbolizes not just one of the biggest but most industrialized and advanced economies. To put it in data, it symbolizes 44% of global nominal GDP, and it also represents almost 10% of the world population. Now, given this heavy numbers, heavy titles, why has the G7 been regularly inviting India as an outreach partner, as an important member that when we are looking at it? This clearly shows that India is growing out to be a very reliable, important economic, strategic, diplomatic partner, and this symbolism needs to be understood in detail. So let's break it down one by one, starting with understanding that when we are talking about India, what India is facilitating or what India is representing. So India in recent years has branded itself and presented itself the leader of global south. Now, when you look at the world map, it can be clearly divided into a group of developed countries and a string of multiple developing countries. Now, when you look at global south, it is basically a geographical, economic and social understanding of a group of nations which are developing, which are lesser industrialized, and they are concentrated in Asia, Africa and Latin America, and in certain parts of Oceania as well. Now, when we are looking at the global south and we have so many countries which can actually use some voice, India has used that vacuum and branded itself as the leader. Now, when we are looking at G7, which represents the 44% of the nominal GDP, then when we look at the global south, which represents a bigger chunk of the population, G7 represents only 10%, but global south represents a bigger chunk of the population. It is a voice that needs the seat on the table to understand the global trajectory that is going to unfold in terms of development. And this is where India just not talks about development. India has talked about climate justice, India has talked about food security, how there is need for development finance, how technology access needs to be played out. For example, in this regards, we have to remember International Solar Alliance. India has played a very important role during the G20 presidency of 2023, and also where we are looking at the voice of Global South summits, how India has represented. If you look at the AI summit that concluded last year, in that context also India has been very clear to be a representative of Global South, and as a representative, G7 wants the global south to be heard, to be represented, and that's why India gets the seat. Now, how exactly India is doing this? We need to talk about that as well. India is basically leveraging the democratic credentials they have and whatever they have in form of development experience to represent the concerns of the developing countries. So India is basically saying whenever bigger decisions are being taken, India is representing that all of this needs to be talked from the developing countries end as well. And when we are looking at Global South, we are talking about 85% of the population in there. So in this regard, this is one big reason which contributes to India's presence there. But at the same time, we also need to know that why exactly G7 is facilitating this presence for India. So is there anything for G7 in it? Yes, there is. Nothing that happens across the international politic foray is without interest. And G7 has great deep interest in a emerging economy such as India. And when we take into account economic rise of India, this is perhaps the strongest reason behind the G7 invitations that we have, the regards, the felicitation and everything that India is getting. GDP $4.5 trillion, population 18% of the global population, fastest growing major economy, and then we have emerging digital public infrastructure where we get to see almost half of the real world digital transactions happening through UPI. Furthermore, we are also branding ourselves as an emerging manufacturing hub. We are a country where not just population is growing, where demand, consumption is also increasing. So this becomes an emerging market where all these economies would want to supply. And that is why India is important to them. Now, just to understand this better, let us talk about supply chain diversification. When we are talking about the rising geopolitical tensions, and China is not the best alternative where we are looking at. We are looking towards India. Apple, Samsung, they are setting up their bases here in terms of manufacturing, and there are several other global names as well. So India is emerging as an alternative manufacturing hub. Apart from that, let's talk about the digital public infrastructure that I mentioned. Aadhaar, UPI, CoWIN, these are governance models that are globally being studied to understand how all of this is being executed. And this is something that the advanced economies can use and then facilitate across the world. So in all of this, yes, the advantage lies towards G7 as well. So India fits in on all the parameters: large market, manufacturing which is being facilitated by the government, digital economy which is facilitated by innovation, and we see a rise in terms of fintech, and also trade. If you look at the number of free trade agreements that India has finalized in the last 5 years, you would understand that why G7 is keen towards India's participation. And now let's bring the geopolitical layer to it as well. We cannot miss the strategic significance in all of this, because we have to see that when we are talking about India, we have to address the region as well. When we are talking about Indo-Pacific, it has become the central stage of global geopolitics. And amidst Indo-Pacific, one side is China and the other side is whatever country can come in to counter China's rise. And in this, India is a huge stakeholder. Located at the center of Indo-Pacific, critical maritime position, if you are looking at Indian Ocean region, almost 80% of maritime trade passes through it. And when India has a voice, and when India has a presence in Quad, India has presence in IORA, and it supports a free, open and accessible Indo-Pacific region. This is the player to keep on your side when you are looking to counter China. Apart from that, this also reiterates the fact that a stable Indo-Pacific cannot be achieved without India's participation, and this is G7 invitations is the way of bringing India into the circle of this very discussion. Now I hope we are clear into why India is being so much encouraged by G7. Even though it's not a member, it is at max an outreach member, a facilitator in all of this situation. But the stakes that we are operating at are really high. So just to summarize, India finds a seat at the G7 table because of its demographic weight, economic weight, strategic weight, and most importantly, here we also get to see that how it is also looking at developmental leadership. Now, on this note, we will move towards conclusion, but we have to remember that participation or being an outreach member to G7 might be able to put India in better position as compared to other countries, but a full-fledged membership to G7 still remains a long way to go for it, because G7, as I mentioned, highly advanced industrialized economies. The expansion to G7 requires the consensus of all the existing members, and as of now, just an outreach partnership is definitely a safer bet than having a full-fledged member. So what are your thoughts on it, that India should strive to join G7, or is it okay to be just an outreach member while establishing its own very importance? Let me know in the comment section. I'll be leaving you here with a prelims practice question. Let me know the answer to this in the comment section. I'll be waiting for your answers. That was all from my side. Thank you so much.